Welcome back to the Deep Dive, brought to you by the OtisWho Network. Today, we're diving into a topic that's been sparking a lot of debate lately, and that's transgender athletes in sports.
Yeah, it's definitely a hot button issue.
And we're going to be taking a look at a CNN panel discussion that, well, it kind of went viral. We're going to unpack the arguments, the emotions, and how the public reacted.
Right, and I think it's important to note this deep dive isn't just about sports.
No, not at all.
It really touches on bigger issues like free speech, social change, and just the challenge of how we talk about these complex issues in a world that feels, well, pretty divided.
Exactly.
I mean, what's so interesting about this debate is that it really is a microcosm of so many broader societal tensions, right? On the one hand, we have concerns about fairness and making sure there's a level playing field in women's sports.
Right.
But then on the other hand, there's this crucial issue of inclusivity.
Right.
And making sure that transgender individuals feel welcomed and respected.
And it often feels like those two sides are presented as, like, totally opposed.
Right, yeah.
As if there's no way to find a solution that respects both fairness and inclusivity.
Exactly, yeah. It's presented as this, like zero-sum game, but the question is it really?
Right.
Are there actually compromises or frameworks that could address both of those concerns?
So to get a sense of just how heated this debate can get,
Yeah.
let's rewind to that viral moment on that CNN panel.
Okay.
And just listen to this.
Okay.
They're not boys. They're not boys. They're not boys. They're not playing girls softball. I'm not going to sit.
Wow.
I mean, you can just feel the raw emotion there.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not just a theoretical discussion for a lot of people. It feels deeply personal and like incredibly high stakes.
Yeah, and you notice how quickly the language escalates.
Yeah.
I mean, the phrase trans girl becomes like a flashpoint, and then you hear terms like trans slur, woke rhetoric, even gaslighting being thrown around, and it just instantly raises the temperature of the conversation.
Yeah, it's like everyone's speaking a different language.
Right.
Which makes it, that much harder to actually find common ground.
Exactly, and this raises a really important question. How does word choice shape not just the debate itself, but also how the public perceives this issue?
Yeah.
Are certain terms just inherently inflammatory, or are they being used, strategically to try to shut down any opposing viewpoints?
Right. And it's clear from the comments section of that YouTube video that, the viewers, they're deeply invested in this.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of them expressing strong opinions, anxieties.
Yeah, the comments section is really fascinating. It gives you this glimpse into the broader public reaction. You see people really grappling with the potential ramifications of transgender athletes participating in women's sports. And a lot of the focus is on, well, scholarship opportunity.
Yeah, and one comment that really stood out to me was from a father who expressed concern about his daughter's chances of getting a scholarship, if transgender women were allowed to compete in her sport.
Yeah, I can understand that fear.
Yeah.
And it highlights the very real-world stakes, for a lot of families.
Absolutely.
I mean, his sentiment reflects a broader anxiety about the future of women's sports in general.
Right.
Whether the inclusion of transgender women could unintentionally disadvantage, well, cisgender female athletes.
Right. So the question becomes, is it possible to create a system that's both inclusive and also protects all of the progress that women have made in athletics?
Right, exactly. It's a tough question.
Yeah, and to really dig into that, I think we need to, unpack the arguments on both sides.
Okay, yeah.
So let's start with those concerns about fairness and the idea that, transgender women might have some biological advantages in sports.
Okay. Well, one of the key arguments centers around just the physiological differences between men and women.
Yeah.
The panel discussion, for example, highlighted the fact that men, on average, have greater muscle mass, bone density, and lung capacity.
Right.
Which obviously can translate into a performance advantage in a lot of sports.
And they even brought up Andy Roddick, the tennis legend.
Oh, right, yeah.
And he was pointing out the stark differences between, the men's and women's games.
Yeah.
He emphasized that men typically serve and hit the ball much harder than women, creating a fundamentally different playing experience.
Right, which kind of underscores the argument that those inherent physical differences could create an uneven playing field if transgender women are allowed to compete against cisgender women.
Right.
Yeah.
But does that automatically mean that inclusion is impossible?
Right, well, that's where the counter-argument comes in.
Okay.
And it's really centered on the idea that we need to create an inclusive and welcoming environment for all athletes,
Yeah.
regardless of their gender identity.
Right, right.
And a lot of proponents of inclusion will often cite the positions of like major medical and psychological organizations.
Okay.
Groups like the American Medical Association and the American Psychological
I
Association.
mean, they both support.
They both support the right of transgender individuals to participate in sports in accordance with their gender identity.
Yeah, and that's a pretty significant point.
It is.
It kind of takes the conversation beyond personal opinions, right?
Exactly.
And brings in the perspectives of respected institutions that have, looked at the scientific evidence, considered the ethical considerations.
Precisely. And it just really highlights how complex this issue is. I mean, you have science, social values, individual rights, all kind of intertwined.
Yeah. So how do we even begin to reconcile these seemingly opposing viewpoints?
Right.
Is there like a middle ground where fairness and inclusivity can actually coexist?
Well, that's the question we're going to keep exploring as we really delve deeper into this complex and multifaceted issue.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
We're going to examine the science, the ethics, the potential solutions that people are proposing, all while keeping in mind the very human stories that are at the heart of this whole debate. It's clear that this debate is about so much more than just like athletic competition.
Yeah.
It's like it's become this focal point for
Right.
all these anxieties people have about societal change,
Right.
how our understanding of gender is evolving,
Yeah.
and even how we define fairness and equality.
And it's interesting, how this specific debate
Yeah,
connects to that broader trend of
Yeah.
political polarization we're seeing everywhere.
everywhere. Yeah, exactly.
It's like every single conversation turns into this us versus them battle
Right,
with no room for any nuance or understanding.
totally.
I mean, just look at the comment section
Oh.
of that YouTube video.
yeah.
It was just full of all this charged language,
Yeah.
accusations of woke agendas, calls to take a stand.
That kind of rhetoric just makes it so hard
I know.
to have any kind of productive conversation
Yeah.
about complex issues.
It does.
It seems like people are way more interested in just, scoring points for their side
Soaring points, exactly.
than actually like genuinely engaging with different perspectives.
And it's not just the commentators either.
Right.
Even the way that CNN panel unfolded,
Yeah.
it felt like it was feeding into that polarization.
It did, yeah.
It was less like a genuine exploration of the issues
Yeah.
and more like everyone just had their talking points.
Exactly, yeah. It was like a platform for that.
Exactly.
And the media's role in all this is just crucial, you know?
It is, yeah.
I mean, journalists have a responsibility to
Yeah.
report on these debates fairly and accurately,
Right.
but at the same time, they operate within a system that often rewards sensationalism and conflict.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's easy to see how that just like feeds this cycle of division.
It does.
The more polarized the coverage is, the
Yeah.
more entrenched people become in their own beliefs.
Right.
And then it's even harder to find any common ground.
Yeah. And we see that playing out
We do.
in the anxieties that the viewers are expressing.
Yeah.
I mean, remember that father who was worried about his daughter's scholarship opportunities?
Yeah, I do.
His concern is understandable, right?
Of course.
But it also reflects this fear
It does.
that any inclusion of transgender athletes will automatically come at the expense of cisgender women.
And that fear is definitely fueled in part
Mm-hmm.
by how these stories get framed. It's
Yeah.
so easy to just create this narrative of winners and losers,
It is.
which totally ignores the possibility
Right.
of finding solutions that actually work for everyone.
Yeah, we need to shift the conversation away from this
Yes, you-
zero-sum mentality.
Exactly.
Instead of focusing on who might be losing out,
Yeah.
we should be figuring out
Yes.
how to create a more inclusive and equitable sporting landscape for all athletes.
100%.
So let's dive into that.
Okay.
Are there any actual solutions or frameworks out there that could address both of these concerns?
Yeah, there are a number of ideas being proposed, and
Yeah.
they range from sport-specific regulations
Right.
to even like creating open categories.
Interesting.
Some researchers are looking at the potential for
Yeah.
individualized assessments,
Yeah.
that take into account more than just testosterone levels.
That's interesting.
Right. So instead of just relying on these broad generalizations
Right.
about biological differences,
Yeah.
could we maybe develop a system
Okay.
that's more tailored to like the specific demands of each sport,
That makes sense.
it would take a lot of careful consideration, of course,
Well, yeah.
and a nuanced understanding of the science and the ethics involved.
It also raises that question of what fairness even means in this context.
Yeah, exactly.
Is it about creating this perfectly level playing field,
Right.
or is it about making sure that everyone has a chance to compete and succeed based on their own individual talents and efforts?
Those are such fundamental questions.
They are.
That we need to be asking ourselves
Yes.
if we want to get past this impasse.
Yeah.
And, it's not even just about finding the right answers.
Right.
It's about fostering a culture of respect and empathy and open dialogue, where we can actually engage with these complex issues in a way that's constructive and meaningful.
Absolutely. It feels like this whole debate really comes down to like a fundamental question
It does.
about how we define fairness,
Yeah.
especially when we're talking about something as complex as gender in athletic competition.
That's it. Yeah.
And it goes way beyond sports, right?
It really does.
It's about how our culture is changing,
Right.
how science is evolving,
Yeah.
and how we balance individual rights with what's good for society as a whole.
It's a tough one.
It is. And we've been talking about the media's role in this conversation.
Yeah.
And it's pretty clear that, how these stories are framed can have a huge impact on how the public sees all of this.
Absolutely.
I mean, look at the CNN panel that we've been analyzing, the way the discussion went,
Right.
the language that was used,
Yeah.
even who they chose to have on as guests.
Exactly.
All of that shapes the narrative around transgender athletes.
It does.
And it's not just, traditional media.
No.
Social media plays a huge role in this too, right?
Oh, huge.
Amplifying certain voices, creating echo chambers.
Yeah.
Where people are only hearing the perspectives that already match what they believe.
Exactly. And that makes it even harder
Yeah.
to have these nuanced, informed conversations.
It does.
It's like you get so caught up in the emotion of it all
Yeah.
that you lose sight of how complicated this really is.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things I've learned from this deep dive
Yeah.
is that there are no easy answers here.
Nope.
It's not about finding some simple solution that makes everyone happy.
Right.
It's about recognizing that there are different perspectives
Yeah.
and trying to create a future that's more inclusive and equitable for everyone.
That's a really important point.
It is, right.
It is.
And we need to move away from this whole idea
They do.
that there are winners and losers in this.
Absolutely.
Instead, we should be focusing on how we can create a system
Yeah.
that respects the rights of transgender individuals
Right.
and the progress that women have made in athletics.
100%.
It's tough,
It is.
but I think it's worth it,
Oh, absolutely.
And it starts with just being willing to have these open and honest conversations,
Yes.
even when they're uncomfortable.
Especially when they're uncomfortable.
So here's a final thought for everyone listening.
Okay.
In a world where it's so easy to just stay in our own little bubbles,
Right.
surround ourselves with people who agree with us,
Mm-hmm.
how do we actually create spaces
Yeah.
for respectful and productive conversations about tough issues?
That's the question, isn't it?
It is.
How do we bridge those divides?
Yeah, and I think that's something we all need to think about,
We do.
because ultimately our ability to have these conversations, to listen to each other,
Listen.
to find some common ground,
Yeah.
that's what will determine whether we can build a society that's truly just and equitable.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, that about wraps it up for this deep dive,
It does.
brought to you by the OtisWho Network.
Thanks for joining us.
And we'll be back next time
We will.
with another thought-provoking look
Yes.
at the issues that are shaping our world.
Always a pleasure.